excited. I hope you guys all had a great Thanksgiving. Anyone still have sleep in their eyes a little bit? Yeah? Well, we'll see what we can do this morning to just turn the page. Maybe not as quick as holiday stores. There was like Christmas trees already out like first week in November. Like faster and faster, like Christmas is upon us in like June nowadays. It's like too much. I can't handle all of it, but I'm excited for us just to turn the page into this year and just look towards Jesus every single week. And again, the devotional ways in which you can do that in your daily life. And we're going to have an overarching theme over these next 4 weeks. While it's one candle here that we'll light next week, overarching theme is going to be peace. Is anyone familiar with this book here? 5 Minutes Peace. Is anybody? Yeah, some are like familiar with the book. Some are just like, I'm familiar with that in my life. Like I just want peace. It's a story of an elephant that takes baths in a bathtub. It's a mom, and she has these young kids, and they're the worst. But she loves them so much, and she's just exhausted all the time. And every time you turn the page, she's like trying to get something done, and then the kids are destroying it. Like, it's just this constant life of chaos, and all she keeps pleading for is, I just want 5 minutes of peace. Just 5 minutes, please. Can't you just stop? Like, stop doing what you're doing. You don't understand. This is all I want. And I thought about this morning as I wonder how many of us just want 5 minutes of peace. And maybe not just 5 minutes. Maybe you want more. Maybe you find yourself in a season of life that just feels like you can't take a full breath. And even when you can, then you have to exhale very quickly, and it's far and few between until you take your next one. And we could think about our own personal life. Parents can resonate with this book very quickly. If you have a job that has a high demand and it seems to have working hours outside of traditional times, you wonder, when can I catch a break? Maybe there's things just as, I don't know, you just gathered around your Thanksgiving table. For some, we look forward to that week. Others dreaded Thursday and what happens within families as you gather for holidays. And it just feels like you could not even get peace in the place in which you wish you could find peace. As the holiday season increases, we start to feel bound financially. You start to prepare and make room for other people and all the activities, and your calendar fills up very quickly, and all of a sudden it's over, and you're like, what did I even just do this last month? I just wish it was more peaceful. And we could call these smaller things, because then we could just look outwards, outside of our life and the lives of those around us. We can look in our city. We can look in our nation. We could just keep asking, like, when does it seem like peace is going to arrive? Even when we go through a political cycle, they tend to promise peace in very different ways, not always using that word, but it seems like we just keep cycling every 4 years on promises that do not yet get fulfilled, over and over. We look across the world and we look at famine, we look at wars. When do we get peace? How do we get peace? Because I stand here with you today arguing that maybe one of the things I want most is peace. We traveled this week and went up to the Bay Area to be with Caitlin's family, and it was wonderful. And I love spending time there. But then you return home and you're just exhausted. Like, even some things that are good, we tend to find ourselves so tired from, and just wishing that we could have peace. But the reality is your life isn't going to slow down now. Or wherever you're at in life right now, it's not just going to slow down where you can just lay on the couch and binge, the newest and latest Netflix series and everything's going to be okay. Usually we're doing that because we're longing for peace, even. But it's not going to slow down. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this won't be the last war globally. Famine will not be eradicated tomorrow. Joblessness will continue to be a reality in people's lives. The diagnosis that was unexpected and dreaded, those things will continue to come. So what do we do? How do you and I find peace? Again, I would argue, I know that you and I long for it. And so what we're going to do over the next 4 weeks is consider that we're missing peace. And there might actually be the reality that while far off, Jesus could actually be within reach. That oftentimes it feels like there's no peace, but it might actually just be right around the corner. It might actually be within a moment of taking a breath. It might actually be with extending a hand to say help. We can find it in so many different ways, but I want us to consider and slow down over the next 4 weeks as we lead to Christmas to actually consider that you and I can have peace, even if your circumstances right now didn't change. I believe that. I believe that right now you and I can have peace, and yet the thing that you do not want most in your life may not go away. You can still experience it. So let's talk a little bit more about that, and let's consider, as we lit the candle of hope this morning, how all of this can turn to hope as we might be dreading our lives right now as we think about them. So what I want to do this morning is I want to look all the way back into the Old Testament to a prophet named Isaiah. And this is a time in which a man named Isaiah was communicating to his king and his people on behalf of God. Prophets were people that God's Spirit would rest on, he would communicate to, and then they would share in present time what they were hearing from God, both for the people now and potentially for what's to come. And so we're going to hang out with Isaiah in a moment in time in which he's talking to his king after just complete chaos. The first 8 chapters of Isaiah are destruction after destruction. People are in fear. People are trying to flee for their lives. Actual cities and people are just being conquered left and right. Villages are being pillaged. I mean, they find themselves in a life of chaos. And we may not be able to relate in the same way, but I can imagine there's areas in your life right now that feel like chaos. There are ways in which your life feels chaotic and you long for and wonder, when am I going to experience peace? And these would be a group of people who are longing for peace. And we pick up in Isaiah 9, verse 3, with some hope. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, meaning there will be no more war. And now you might know this one. For to us a child is born, and to us a son is given. And the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. On the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness. From that time on and forever, the zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Now, on this side of history, we might hear that and think Christmas. We might hear that and imagine a little baby being born in a feed trough in the middle of nowhere with some animals around him and parents that were on the run. Christmas story coming back to you a little bit. Okay, good. So we're thinking Jesus. Now, there's a reality in which, yes, we can read that on this side of history. When Isaiah wrote this, he may not have been thinking about Jesus as much as we are now. This was 700 years before Jesus was born. That'd be a weird thought. 700 years before Jesus was born, Isaiah is saying that there will be one who will come and he will be the Prince of Peace. He could potentially be talking about a king named Hezekiah. And the reality is that what Isaiah is describing is hope-filled. That there will actually be a king that will reign and bring the peace in which we so long for. He will come in and usher in a new kingdom so that we can experience life to the full, so that there will be no more chaos. And he will rule with wisdom and with might. He will have divinity about him above and beyond any king that we have seen. And he will lead in a way that will bring peace. We will actually have peace. If you look at kings back in the day, what they were gauged on, whether they did well or not, was whether they brought peace or not. People would talk about that king being a great king if that king brought peace. Now, we'll talk a little bit more in a second of the reality of that peace oftentimes. But they looked at them and said, can this king bring peace? And that is how we will determine if this king was good or not. Hezekiah actually went on to be a great king. He had his faults like any other one. That's what I love about the Bible. And anyone who maybe questions the scriptures, I would argue that if you're trying to convince anyone into anything, you don't offer all the horror stories and the bad people and all the mess ups, right? You try to beef something up. You're like, oh, look, it's perfect. Everyone's great. This kind of thing. And what you see is actually the imperfections of people over and over and over again. But Hezekiah ultimately was a great king that led for decades, yet he doesn't seem to be the king in which Isaiah was talking about, does he? He dies, another king comes, it repeats. He dies, another king comes, it repeats. And yet, every single king, from king to king, people still long for peace. They long for wholeness. So very quickly, we go to this next slide. One of the things I want to draw out from this passage, it says, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. Now, whether this is the scriptures, whether this is culture, whether this is Talladega Nights, we do this thing with Jesus where he's like this little baby, right? And do you pray to baby Jesus? Do you pray to adult Jesus? We do this thing where we tend to maybe humanize Jesus, which I am one who will continue to argue for increasing the humanity of Jesus for our understanding, to relate to grow closer to actually better relate with God. But I don't know if we want to increase the humanity to where we start to decrease and lose sight of the divinity. Meaning that there's something that this passage is saying that we might miss in our most common readings of the Christmas story. Because what it seems to be talking about here is a king. Not just a baby born in a manger to grow old and become friends with people and just get us to heaven, which oftentimes we can reduce Jesus to. It's talking about someone with power and with authority, and that will rule and that will reign and will bring effective change through peace and through fathering, and through being mighty. Some, you could even argue, a couple of these names actually would relate to being a warrior. This is very strong imagery. This is an idea of Jesus that I don't wake up to every morning. That he is a king that is desiring to rule and to reign, and that in the end of the day, he will have his way. If we start to break down what a king is, the authoritarian rule that they have, the all-knowingness that some would claim to have, yet we know this in God here, the mighty power, the way in which they would move into certain things to conquer. This is the imagery of this little baby in a manger, that he would actually be considered a king. And highlighting here the Prince of Peace, and a peace in which there will be no end. How many times do you look to something for peace and it seems to end much quicker than you desired it to? On the way home from the vacation saying, oh, I wish it was a little bit longer. Maybe the fulfillment of a certain desire, relationship. We look for peace in cheap ways. We do it through entertainment. Sometimes we try to find it at the bottom of a bottle. We start to type certain things in a web browser. I mean, we could keep going down and down and down. You and I are people who are longing for peace, and peace that will actually sustain. Not cheap peace that leaves the day after and we wonder where it went and now we can't wait to have it again. A prince of peace. A prince has authority and the right to the throne. A prince is the heir of the kingdom. This is communicating that there is someone to come that has the authority of the king, that has the authority to dispense something in which he's claiming to dispense. So what is peace? If you and I actually ask questions right now, we would maybe have different answers of what peace is. Scripturally, and especially throughout the Old Testament, it's considered shalom. In Jewish tradition, this would actually be a greeting, shalom. And what you're doing is you're asking someone, not just how are you? What do they say in the UK? I always love this one. You all right? And I was like, you all right? It's like, I don't think so. I don't know. I thought I was all right, but you asked me that. I don't know anymore. But we say, hey, how are you doing, right? And then we never pause long enough to actually hear how anyone's doing. But it's just a formality. It's a way in which we greet. And actually in Jewish tradition, we say shalom. You're actually asking, are you whole? Are you complete? Is there anything missing? Is there anything going on in which it should not be going on that way? Are you lacking? Because shalom is beyond peace. Peace is simply oftentimes in our framework the actual absence of conflict, the absence of war, the absence of damage, the absence of something. But shalom is saying that I can take everything that's there and I can make it complete. That in your current circumstance and the way in which you're experiencing life and the things that are wanted and unwanted, I can bring you peace because this is complete. Everything right now does not have to change, and yet you can feel whole. Yet you can experience life to the full beyond your circumstances. That God is reigning and ruling with his peace to bring you and I life when it doesn't make sense for you and I to have life. For you and I have peace when it doesn't make sense to have peace. For you and I have grace when it doesn't make sense to have grace. For you and I to have compassion when it doesn't make sense to have compassion. God is dispensing peace in the form of shalom to its original intent of the Garden of Eden. It was shalom. It was perfect. It was complete. And one day in the book of Revelation, we will see again a garden that brings shalom, that is whole and complete, where there will be no more tears. God's idea of peace is so much larger than yours and I's. And he has ideas in how he wants to actually give it to us. And we see this picked up in the birth narrative in Luke. Luke was a doctor who pretty much turned over every stone to get to the fine details of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. And he accounts for when the angels come to his mother, Jesus' mother, Mary, and they say, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end." Does this sound familiar? 700 years before, Isaiah was saying something similar. This next slide drawing out a few points. Do we have the next one? Sweet. There's a good chance I'd forgotten to put it in. The Lord God will give him the throne. Who sits on a throne? Prince and a king. His father David, and he will reign. He will rule. He will have his way. He will exercise his authority and his power over Jacob's descendants forever, which will also be Israel, which will also be Jewish, which will also go on for us to be grafted in as Christians. And his kingdom will never end. They're not talking about a baby. They're talking about a king. They're talking about someone who wants to actively rule and reign and change the face of the earth. At the end of the day, Jesus is king. I wonder for you and I this morning, do you see Jesus as your king? Does he have authority in your life to rule and reign in a way that he wants to rule and reign? That's a downside to having a bad king. Is that king has ways of ruling in your life that are unwanted. But that's also the upside of a good king, is to give yourself to the way of that king. A king who has promised to bring peace, to bring wholeness, to father his people, to be mighty beyond any circumstance that you and I can find ourselves in, or an understanding that you and I might have of our life or the world. This Christmas season, we don't just look to a cute baby in a manger, we look to a king. Someone who has come to you and I and say, let me have my way with your life. Trust me. Let me give you my grace. Let me be compassionate towards you. Let me offer you mercy beyond what you could ever experience. Let me show you a way that creates beauty in this world. Let me have your life. I don't think about Jesus this way, admittedly, as often as I think I should. To trust a good king who has come to take over, who has come to conquer everything that I want him to conquer. But yet there are still ways in my mind and in my heart and in my soul which I've determined that I get to be king of. And what tends to happen every time, over time, is that those two kingdoms start to collide. And things don't go as peaceful as maybe they could. But yet God still sits on his throne as the king, to continuing over and over again, asking you and I to come. Come to me. Allow me to be your king. Allow me to have your life. Allow me to talk about your money. Allow me to talk about your sex. Allow me to talk about your marriage. Allow me to talk about your relationship. Allow me to talk about your vocation. Allow me to rule effectively in your life. Give it to me. But again, I admit, I don't oftentimes think of Jesus as king, as Lord, as ruler, as reigner. Is Jesus your king? In what areas might you have determined he is my king? Well, when things are going bad, I need a king. But when things are good, I'm doing pretty well. I'm kinging pretty well. But it seems that he wants king of everything. He wants to be king of your and I's life so that he can bring peace. And within the church and outside of it, I think we see this everywhere. What we really do want is the kingdom. We want beauty and grace and compassion and mercy and love and unity. We want all of it, but we don't oftentimes want the king that brings those things. And so we say, God, I'll take everything you have to offer me in a heartbeat. But you just can't. No, I got this one. I'll figure it out. I can't do that. You can't ask me that much. Jesus is king. Now, real quick, we're going to go into a reflection here in a minute. But I just want to compare this to what we know as peace culturally back then. For the Romans in Jesus' time, it was called Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. Because again, a king would be known of whether they can bring peace or not. So what you would have is kings declaring that they are bringing peace. Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. This peace came by a very strong hand. And let's call it a steel-toe boot. This peace was supposed to be for all people, yet it came under the crushing of skulls. This was not a peace. This was control. This was the misuse of power. Many, many, many people did not experience the peace of Rome as it so declared. And even in Elijah's time, 700 years before, the Pax Assyrica, this would be the peace of Assyria. in which they lived. And again, you actually have one of the most brutal kingships in this time. Bodies after bodies after bodies clearing the way so that some could call it peace. This was not true peace. And I wonder for you and I this morning, in what ways are we trying to find peace that is not true peace? Right now. What area of your life are you just experiencing chaos, stress, anxiety, worry, fear? And I don't know about you, but anytime I've operated from a place of fear, I look back and say, why did I have fear about that? Why did I make that decision based on that premise? What was I even anxious about? There's a God who sits on a throne that wants to be the king of your and I's life, that can sit above the fear, can sit above the anxiety, that can sit above the worry, not detached from it, because he's a compassionate king, a loving king that says, come to me, bring me those things. Give me the anxiety, give me the worry, give me the fear, give me the things that are not going well so that I can give you my peace. And so a part of letting God be king, a part of him letting be Lord, a part of us saying, yes, I want peace, is for you and I to actually give the other stuff up to clear room for his peace. Because oftentimes it's us holding on to certain things that's like elbowing peace out and be like, no, I'm going to keep worrying about this. Nope, this is like the end of everything. I can't keep living. There's nothing beyond this. And I don't say this lightly, because each of us in so many ways are carrying very heavy things that God's mercy is moving towards. I love the motherly attributes that describes God coming close to those that are brokenhearted, those that are weary, those that are troubled, for all the reasons, because he's a God who cares. He's a king who sits on a throne that actually considers the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions and the lives of the people so that he can bring peace. So that he can bring peace. So if you had a good and gracious king, what's the thing that you would bring to him right now and say, God, I can't. God, why? God, please no more. God, help. What is it in your life in which he wants to bring you peace, wholeness, completeness, even if that circumstance may not change? The missing piece within reach. It feels far off oftentimes. But this is an invitation for you and I to reach, to extend a hand, to share our heart, to offer our thoughts, to give our life to a king who wants to reign and rule in peace in your life. C.S. Lewis, in his writings during the war that were published over the radio, he put into some books, and this is something that he says that I found provocative. I wonder whether people who ask God to interfere, you guys ever do that? Like, God, will you help? Do you interfere? Can you save this? Can you do this? Openly and directly in our world, quite realize what it will be like when he does. When that happens, it's the end of the world. When the author walks on to the stage, the play is over. God is going to invade. All right, but what is the good of saying you are on his side then? Right now, I'm on God's side, and I need God for this, and I've done this with God, and God saved me here. And what is the good of saying I'm a Christian, I follow Jesus, I practice these things, whatever it is? What's the good of saying that you're on his side when you see the whole natural universe melting away like a dream, and something else, something that never entered your head to conceive, comes crashing in? Something so beautiful to some of us and so terrible to others that none of us will have any choice left. For this time, it will be God without disguise. Something so overwhelming that it will strike either irresistible love or irresistible horror into every creature. It will be too late then to choose your side. There is no use saying you choose to lie down when it has become impossible to stand up. That will not be the time for choosing. It will be the time when we discover which side we really have chosen. Whether we realized it before or not, now, today, this moment, is our chance to choose the right side. God is holding back to give us that chance. It will not last forever. We must take it or leave it. Every moment is a moment to offer ourselves to the kingship of Jesus. Every morning we rise out of our bed, every night when we lay our head on our pillow, every hour and minute in between is a moment to say, God, I choose for you to reign and to rule into my life. May you bring your peace. May I continue to give the things that are actually keeping me from experiencing your peace. You and I have a choice every single moment to come to a God who sits on a throne in his mighty power, in his gracious fatherliness, in his everlasting love. I invite Aaron up, and I think I'm going to end with a story, actually. Not that you guys knew what else I was going to end with. These moments of choosing, none of them look the same. I'll start with that. I think some of you maybe have heard my story of I think when I was radically encountered by God, and I still had a choice to make, even in that. This message I thought of this story, and I'll say why in a second, but I was 21 at the time, in college, and grew up with the most wonderful parents and a home that loved and cared for me. Was baptized when I was 12, and I think I had like a real experience of like giving my life to Jesus, or at least maybe in that time inviting him into my heart. And it was powerful, it was real. And I think that actually kept me from a lot of things in life in which I chose very destructive patterns for a very long time. Anything that I had an appetite for, I would find a way to get. I would move through the world just pleasurably. And anything that I was attracted to just made sense. And oftentimes it came because I could find applaud for it. I could find praise for it. People liked me for this or for that. And life continued on that way for a while until it seemed to hit a breaking point. Caitlin, my now wife, and I were dating at the time. We were a year into our relationship, and things were just not good. Very unhealthy relationship. We were both unhealthy in a number of ways. It was just destructive. We came out of unhealthy patterns and relationships. But about a year in, there was something different where we said, we actually want this one to work. This means something. But in order for it to work, we need to work differently. And that's going to take some work. And through all the times in which my parents had probably every reason to no longer pick up the phone, no longer send checks anymore, no longer care, all the reasons I gave them, the one thing that I continued to turn to was like, I think we should go to church. And that's the one thing that cut through in that moment. All the times in which they were near, all the times in which they were close, all the times in which they picked up the phone, all the times in which they reminded me of a God who cares and that wants to be my king. We didn't use that language, but essentially that's it. There's a God who wants to bring peace and wholeness to you, Ryan. And he has a way for you to do that. And so we started going to church and doing the churchy thing, going to college groups, and it was great. And people poured into my life in different ways when it didn't make sense. Be hungover, having breakfast with like the college pastor, and he's like, hey, you should be thinking about like church leadership. I'm like, dude, that's not what you want me doing right now in my life. But he saw something, and I'm thankful for that. And we got to a point in our relationship where just doing church started to make more sense, and we started realizing we needed to change our ways. And so I moved out of the house with all the guys that I was very close to that I chose a lot of destructive behaviors with. And I found a little one-bedroom apartment above a garage in downtown Sacramento. And one night I'm laying there trying to go to sleep, and I'm just crippled by fear. I look back now, and I think I was having a massive panic attack. I'm sobbing. I can't breathe. I always joke at this point. I was scared of three things: sharks, houseless people, and death. I'm only scared of sharks now. Okay, that's it. And those were like real fears. Like I had like real things around that stuff. Still with sharks. And I'm laying there in bed, and from like 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., I just can't breathe. I can't get a hold of my life. And all I'm thinking about is death. I'm just gripped by fear. And all I know to do in that moment is to finally just call my parents. And so 299-6479. and they pick up the phone on the cord by their bed. Nina will tell you that one later, what that is. And so as I'm sitting there sobbing and breathing, not being able to breathe, my parents get on the phone with me and they spend an hour just talking and praying and listening. And by the end of the phone call, they say, hey, why don't you turn on one of those Christian music stations? It's in like the 800s on the TV. And I turn it on and finally find it. And I wish I remember the song because this gal is singing almost the exact words my parents had just prayed for me. And it was peace. And so I start to experience peace. I start to calm down. I stop sobbing like a young baby. I start to be able to breathe a little bit. And I eventually fall asleep. And then all of a sudden, as I start to doze off up on my ceiling, and I rise up because we live in downtown Sac. My car's been broken into multiple times. Here comes that fear of death again. And like the tough guy I am, I got my dog with me. And I push him out the door first. Like, dude, go figure it out. I have like my bat and my boxers. And I walk around the apartment, again, above the garage on this person's property and looking on the roof, looking on the ground. I mean, there's nothing that makes sense to what that noise was that I felt that actually woke me up. And so finally go back inside, calm down, go to sleep. Next day, my mom calls to check in, and we're having a conversation, and we're going through it. And she's like, so what happened? I was like, well, I started to fall asleep and explain this thing. She goes, oh, hold on. How many thumps were on the roof? I was like, oh, there's 4. And she goes, oh, well, when we got off the phone, your dad and I kept praying. Every time I tell this story, and we prayed for 4 angels to come down and be on the posts of your house. It was a 4-post house. And in that moment, I felt a power fill my body that I've never felt before. I haven't felt it from my head to my toe. There was something as if like you go to a chiropractor and it just like snaps your body back in place, like you can feel it. I don't like my chiropractor now who uses that little gun and you don't feel your whole body shake. It works. But the whole thing just shook my body. It's like everything just came to alignment. And in that moment, God became more real than he'd ever been, than I could actually conceive intellectually. And I felt a power of peace enter my body that I could not ignore. And yes, there was a lot of things that led to it. And no, not everyone's story is the same. But in that moment, God was bringing his peace into my life. And yet at the end of the day, I still had a choice, didn't I? I still had a choice to say, was this real? And if it was real, then I want to give my life to this. And if it wasn't real, it still seems like something I should be paying attention to and give my life to. And that changed the trajectory of my life and why we all sit here today. There is a God who is wanting to redeem everything that's going on in our lives. That is wanting to bring wholeness and peace in his mercy and in his righteousness and in his justice. And he's asking you and I to offer ourselves to say, God, may your kingship have its way in my life. May I be one who creates beauty with you. May I be one who opens up to and does my best to receive the peace that you're offering, even though my circumstance doesn't make sense. Because think about this. The people that Elijah spoke to went on for how many more years not experiencing the one that was prophesied to come. And yet, they still offered their way as King Hezekiah led with a mighty ruler on the throne. He over and over again was a king who gave himself to the life of God. How many people stood in between the 400 years that were silent until Jesus was born, hoping and waiting and praying for God to come? How many people, even in Jesus' time, waited and waited. He did not come with a sword and overthrowing the Roman Empire. He came in peace, in a manger, eventually ushering to a cross where he was murdered, riding in on a lowly donkey. Everything did not make sense. Yet the power of what Jesus proclaimed and demonstrated was attractive enough for people to say, I'm here. And then after Jesus, we go back to the Roman peace that was not so peaceful. And it was Christians who stood by with the hope of a promise that he will yet one day come again, and that his peace will come in full. And in that moment, the world is looking on for people who open themselves up to peace in times of anxiety, that stand on a firm foundation, that say that this will not dictate my life. This fear that I'm experiencing right now will not inform my decisions, because there is a God of peace that has a way for me. It's those people, the early Christians, that were attributed to having patience as one of the most powerful things that carried the church forward to today. Why we stand here? Because people rested in the fact that God was again bringing his peace, and that he will bring it now, today, and he will bring it in the fullness again. So this morning, as I've gone over, genuinely, if you have an area in your life where you're saying, I want more peace, I would just invite you to vulnerably stand right now. I'm not going to do much with that, but I think there's something in C.S. Lewis's quote that says to choose. And so just right now, if you want to experience God's peace in your life in a specific area, why don't you just stand? And I'm standing with you. May I admit that. And so we simply, as we stand, we just ask for God's peace to come. Right now, for God's peace to move into the circumstances in which we're standing for. For one who has come as a king to say right now, I can see you. I see your life. I see your circumstances. I see how you've arrived to this moment now. I see those around you that you're standing on behalf of. And it's he who says, I say these things, talks about trouble, so that you may have peace. You will experience hardship in this world. You will experience really hard things that are unwanted. But I have overcome the world. I've overcome. And so right now we stand asking for a God who's overcome to move present in peace to our life. So God, fill us. Right now we ask for your peace just to meet every person standing. We do ask for things to change. We ask for things to be mended. We ask for the chiropractic adjustment, for things to be set right in the way in which you've attended them. For marriages, for addictions, for shame, for guilt. We ask for your power to move us forward, to operate in peace, to not consider the fear in which people operate from as the fear in which we operate from. As Isaiah talked about in the chapter before this. Do not consider their conspiracies your conspiracies. God, come in your power and your peace right now. Fill this room. Why don't we all stand together?